Hey guys, welcome to Horror Night Show. Tonight we have 5 scary apartment stories for you. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's start with the first story. Our haunted first apartment. Back in 1972, I had just gotten married to my first husband, Marcus. I used to call him the Bum. Not out of affection, but because, well, he earned it. We ran off to Kentucky to get married since I was 18 and didn't need anyone's permission anymore. Looking back, it was a foolish decision, but at the time, I thought I was being brave. I realized later that I was just being stubborn. When we came back to Willoughby, we moved in with Marcus's foster parents. My own family was just relieved I was alive, though they weren't exactly thrilled about the man I'd chosen. They saw things I hadn't yet. Marcus's foster mother, Edna, owned a big old house that had once been a boarding home. One of the rooms upstairs was haunted. Yes, haunted, by a man named Calvin who had died there years ago. Calvin had struggled with drinking and didn't seem to realize he had passed on. He wasn't violent, just lost. I eventually helped him cross over, but that's another story. We stayed with Edna and her husband Paul for about a year and a half. It wasn't easy. Privacy was rare unless we were in our room or out playing gigs. Marcus and I were both musicians, guitarists in a small 4-piece band. Our drummer Linda was also our manager. She booked our shows, handled the money, and basically kept the rest of us from falling apart. Honestly, those gigs were the only fun I had in that marriage. Marcus didn't have much of a work ethic. I kept hoping he'd step up, but the truth was, I was carrying the weight, emotionally and financially. When the gigs weren't enough to keep us afloat, I got a job as a nurse's aide at the local hospital. $2.25 an hour felt like gold back then. That job gave us enough stability to finally move into our own place. Our new apartment was inside a grand old mansion that had been chopped into 8 tiny units, 4 upstairs, 4 downstairs. Ours was on the lower left, facing the street. Rent was $110 a month, and we could actually afford it. The place was small, so small that if you stood in the center of the living room and turned slowly, you could see the entire apartment. It had a living room, a bedroom that connected to the bathroom, and a kitchen. The kitchen was the biggest room. There was a door in there that led to the basement, but we never went down there. Something about it felt off. The apartment needed work. The living room walls were this sickly yellow that made my stomach turn. So we wallpapered over it and put down some linoleum. The hardwood floors were splintery and cold. I told the landlords we weren't expecting any reimbursement. We were just fixing it up for ourselves. First few weeks, things were fine. We were too busy settling in to notice anything odd. But once the dust settled and we got into a routine, the strange sounds began. At first, it was just the occasional creak or bump. Normal stuff. In an old house. But the noises started getting louder. They came mostly from the apartment directly above ours. During the day, it sounded like furniture being moved. Heavy dragging across the floor, footsteps pacing, even hammering sometimes. I figured the neighbors were just loud or maybe renovating. But then it started happening at night. Every night it would start around midnight. The sound of something heavy rolling across the floor overhead, then banging, like someone hammering nails into the walls, kept us up for hours. After a few weeks of this, I'd had enough. One afternoon while Marcus was out, I called the landlord. His wife answered. I explained that whoever was living above us was making a racket all night long. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then she quietly said, "We'll check on it." That was it. No follow-up, no promise, nothing. Just silence and an awkward goodbye. The noise didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. So one evening, Marcus and I went upstairs to talk to the neighbor directly. We knocked on the door, waited, knocked again. No answer. Then the door across the hall opened. A woman in her 40s stepped out. Her name was Brenda. She looked at us curiously and asked if we needed something. We explained what had been happening. The dragging, the banging, the noise that wouldn't let us sleep. Brenda gave us a puzzled look and said, "That apartment's been empty for over a year." When Brenda told us that apartment had been empty for over a year, I just stood there, not really understanding. "What do you mean empty?" I asked. "We hear noises up there every night. Something dragging, hammering, pacing. She nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to decide how much to tell us. That place, it's been locked up since the last tenant moved out. No one's lived there since. The landlord won't rent it out. Marcus looked uneasy, but he shrugged it off with a joke. Something dumb like, well, maybe it's raccoons. With a hammer. I didn't laugh. That night I stayed up. I wanted to hear it again. Really listen. Sure enough, around 12:30 a.m., the banging started. Not soft, not distant. It was loud. Like someone was slamming a mallet into the floor right above our heads. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. And then, for the first time, I heard something that chilled me completely. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps from one side of the room above me to the other. Then they stopped. For a few seconds, it was dead silent. Then, 3 knocks. Not on a door, on our ceiling. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I brought it up again with the landlord. I caught him in the driveway and told him exactly what we'd heard. He looked uncomfortable, said something vague like, "Old houses make noise." But when I pushed harder, asked why they wouldn't rent the upstairs apartment, he cut me off. "There's nothing up there," he said almost too quickly. "Just storage." Storage, huh? I didn't believe him. Marcus was skeptical, but I could tell even he was spooked. He started keeping a flashlight next to the bed just in case. We joked about it during the day, tried to anyway, but at night we listened, and the noises kept coming. A few weeks later, I was home alone. Marcus was out with the band, and I was folding laundry in the kitchen. I had the back door open. It led to the shared porch, and the screen door was shut, letting in the breeze. Was humming along to the radio when I heard a creak on the porch. I turned around. The screen door was still shut, but something was off. I got that feeling, the one that starts at the back of your neck and trickles down your spine like ice, water. Then the doorknob turned, just a tiny twitch at first. Then again, slowly, deliberately, like someone was testing it from the other side. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just watched. The knob turned once more, harder this time. Then it stopped. Dead silence. I lunged forward and locked the door. Later, when Marcus got home, I told him everything. He tried to laugh it off, said maybe it was a prank, some kid from the neighborhood. But we both knew it wasn't. The door was too high up for anyone to reach the knob from the outside porch steps without being seen. And besides, there was no one around. That was the night I stopped trying to explain things away. I knew something was wrong with that building. Not just creaky old house wrong, but deeply, spiritually wrong. And it was about to get worse. After the doorknob incident, everything changed. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like the silence itself was watching me. Even during the day, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, feeling like someone was just out of view. And at night, the knocking turned into something worse. It wasn't just noises anymore. Things started moving. It started small. Drawers left open. Lights flicking on in rooms we hadn't entered. One morning I found every kitchen cabinet gaping open like a mouth mid-scream. I asked Marcus if he was looking for something. He just shook his head and said, "I thought you did that." Neither of us said what we were really thinking. Then came the dreams. Night after night I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, like I'd run a marathon. I couldn't remember most of them, just flashes. A door that wouldn't close, a figure watching from the stairs, cold hands pulling me down into the floor. One night I dreamed I was floating above the bed. Not metaphorically. I mean, I could see myself lying there, eyes open, mouth trying to scream. Something was holding me down, something huge. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. When I finally woke up, I had deep red marks across my chest and arms, like someone had tried to hold me in place. Marcus didn't believe me, or maybe he didn't want to. He told me I was under stress, that I should stop watching horror movies before bed, but I could see it in his eyes. He was scared too. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. It was raining hard. I was alone again, cleaning up the living room when I heard it crying. Not a baby, not a person, it was wrong, too slow, too hollow, like it was coming through water. I followed the sound to the hall. It was coming from above, from the supposedly empty apartment. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the spare key we'd found in a drawer, one we assumed was for the basement, and climbed the back stairs. I shouldn't have done it. The key fit. The door creaked open into darkness. The smell hit me first. Mildew, dust, and something sweeter. Almost like rot, but older. Like wet paper. And spoiled perfume. I stepped inside. The apartment was untouched, not dusty, not covered in cobwebs. Everything looked like someone had just stepped out for groceries. Dishes in the sink, shoes near the door, a mug half full of what might have been coffee on the windowsill. That's when I noticed the mirror, a huge cracked thing leaning against the far wall. It was covered in a sheet, but the sheet was moving, not like wind, like breathing. I backed away. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun around and tried to open it, locked, and then I heard it again. Footsteps, not coming toward me, underneath me, from the floor below, from my apartment. Someone was walking around down there. I could hear the creaking wood, the familiar floor plan echoing back. Down the hall, past the kitchen, into the bedroom. Into the bedroom where Marcus was sleeping. I don't remember getting out. I don't remember how the door opened or how I got back down the stairs. All I remember is bursting through our door and finding Marcus standing in the living room, pale as chalk. He looked at me and said, "I just saw you." I shook my head. I was upstairs. He pointed toward the hallway. "No, you were in the bedroom. You stood in the doorway and looked at me. You didn't say anything. You just smiled and walked out." We moved out that night. Didn't even take half our stuff. I don't care if I ever see that building again. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the knocking. 3 soft knocks, somewhere behind the walls. That was the end of the first story. Now, let's begin the second one. Shadows in the upstairs room. My partner and I have lived a bit like wanderers, moving wherever our jobs took us in our respective fields. We'd always felt a special connection to Arizona, and even owned a small house there. But during this particular chapter of our lives, we accepted assignments in the northwestern corner of the state, where housing was incredibly hard to come by. Houses were snapped up so quickly that they often sold before they even appeared on real estate listings. Renting options were nearly non-existent, except for a handful of what were called corporate apartments, units reserved only for adults on short-term job assignments. My partner managed to secure a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor, while we continued searching for a rental house. When we first moved in, I didn't sense anything off about the place. Then again, we were both so busy juggling our work schedules that we didn't really spend time trying to get a feel for the apartment. I took the 2nd bedroom and turned it into my dressing room, an arrangement we preferred since we both like to keep our own closets separate. I'm a creature of habit, and every day after work, I'd enter my dressing room, set my bag down on the desk, and place my keys right on top. But almost immediately, something strange started happening. I'd reach for my keys to leave them. Next morning, and they'd be gone. I'd search the entire apartment, frustrated beyond belief, only to find nothing. After several frantic searches on the 3rd try, I'd walk back into the room and see the keys right where I'd left them, on the desk. At first, I thought I was just misplacing them, but when this happened repeatedly, I realized something else was going on. I spoke quietly to whatever presence might be there, asking it to leave my keys alone. After that, the keys stayed put. Another odd thing happened with the kitchen floor. It was covered with old linoleum, well-maintained but lacking any shine, so I decided to start waxing it regularly. One day, while mopping and waxing, I noticed a small patch in the corner that looked oddly green. At first, I thought it was some spilled food coloring. I didn't see any other sign of it, so I changed the mop water and kept cleaning. I asked my partner if he'd spilled anything green there, but he said no. It was strange, but I didn't dwell on it. Then, not long after, my partner mentioned seeing something green in the freezer. He thought it looked like spilled sherbet or ice cream, but we didn't have any of those items, and we'd cleaned the fridge thoroughly before moving in. I wiped the freezer down carefully, and later found small green spots inside the cabinets that had already been cleaned before we put our dishes away. I couldn't help but wonder what exactly was trying to get our attention. What was present in this apartment that we couldn't see? One night, after a long day, my partner and I went to bed. He fell asleep almost immediately, but I lay awake on my right side, staring toward the closet, somewhere between wakefulness and sleep. Suddenly, an apparition appeared beside the bed. An elderly woman, very thin and fragile looking, around 75 or 80 years old. Her hair was cut short in a style common among women her age. She was crying quietly, wringing a tissue in her hands. A bright white glow surrounded her, so intense it lit up the whole bedroom. Even though she didn't speak out loud, I could feel her sadness deeply, as if she was communicating her grief directly to my mind. She revealed without words that her son had abandoned her. Suddenly, her sorrow turned to anger. She began throwing tissues at me as if they were baseballs, her expression fierce and wild. Startled and frightened by the sudden change, I let out a scream, waking my partner. I couldn't bring myself to explain what I had just seen or felt. Instead, I told him it was just a nightmare and urged him to go back to sleep. It took me several days before I could even talk about the experience. Looking back, I wish I had asked the apartment office manager about the history of the place, if anyone had lived there before us, if any tragedies had occurred. But at the time, our lives were so hectic, and my mind was consumed with work and other concerns. I just pushed it aside. Eventually, about a month before our lease ended, we finally found a house to rent. Relieved, we began planning to move out and focused on cleaning the apartment to ensure we'd get our full deposit back. As smokers, we were especially concerned about eliminating any stale smoke odors for the next tenants. Living in a dry climate with no rain in sight, we left the windows cracked open for a week to air out the place. Every morning before work, I'd dedicate time to deep clean one room, from scrubbing walls to shampooing carpets. I'm a bit obsessive when it comes to cleaning, but this time I was determined to leave the apartment spotless. On the very first morning of this cleaning routine, I heard a knock at the door. It was our neighbor from the apartment next door, the one on the right. She'd always been kind, friendly, even thoughtful, once bringing us a small gift from one of her trips. But this morning, her demeanor was completely different. She was furious. She told me angrily that she had spent the entire night in the emergency room because of our smoking. I was shocked and tried to explain that we hadn't been in the apartment for 2 weeks and that the windows had been open the whole time. She insisted that the smoke had seeped into the walls and was affecting her apartment. I was baffled. There's a firewall between the units, and in the 11 months we lived there, we never had any complaints or issues. Plus, we always smoked with a window open, even in the coldest weather. We were hardly home except to sleep, and we kept the place well ventilated. The apartment managers eventually moved her to another unit. When I told them about her outburst, they just shook their heads. The male manager and handyman assured me that smoke couldn't leak through the walls the way she described. Still, I wonder what possessed her to react like that day. Could it have been something beyond the natural? During our final days in the apartment, while I was taking down the blinds in the last room I was cleaning, I had my arms full. I was heading to the bathroom to drop the blinds into the tub for washing, when I suddenly remembered I hadn't pulled up the lever to stop the water from draining. I muttered, "Shoot, I forgot to pull the lever." As I bent down to place the blinds into the tub, I noticed the lever was already pulled up, holding the water in. It was impossible that someone else had done it since we were alone in the apartment. Right then, I realized that the spirit, whatever it was, had helped me out. I thanked it quietly, promising that we would be out of its home soon. After that strange moment with the bathtub lever, my partner and I hurried to finish cleaning the apartment. Each day as I scrubbed walls and vacuumed carpets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were sharing the space with something unseen. Something that was both watching and sometimes trying to communicate. We had grown so busy with our work and packing, we barely talked about the strange experiences. But those little moments lingered in my mind. It was as if the apartment itself held memories, echoes of a past life that hadn't quite let go. When the day finally came to move out, we felt relief, but also a subtle sadness. I wondered about the elderly woman who had appeared to me. Who she was, what story she carried. Was she truly lost, abandoned by her son as she had shown me? Was she simply trying to reach out in the only way she knew how? I thought about the green stains, the odd patches on the kitchen floor, and the mysterious spots in the freezer and cabinets. They had seemed like small clues or signs, inexplicable but persistent. They never harmed us, but they made the ordinary feel strange. I asked myself if these were warnings or simply reminders of presence. Maybe a spirit trying to express itself, or perhaps just remnants of the house's history left behind like faint fingerprints. The neighbor's outburst still puzzled me. Was it a coincidence that she reacted so strongly on the very day I began deep cleaning? Or was there a link to the energy in the walls, the lingering traces of the past? The managers dismissed it as paranoia, but to me it felt like one more thread in an invisible tapestry. After we left, I promised myself I would learn more about the apartment's past. I imagined walking into the leasing office and asking about previous tenants, about any stories they might have heard. But the busyness of life kept pushing that curiosity aside. Still, I carry the memories with me. The bright, sorrowful apparition, the inexplicable green stains, the helpful gesture with the tub lever, and the neighbor's strange reaction, all pieces of an experience that defies simple explanation. Our time there taught me that not every place is just walls and floors. Some homes hold stories, emotions, and sometimes even the echoes of people who once called them home. And sometimes, those echoes reach out, seeking to be heard. Though we've moved on, I sometimes think about that fragile woman in the white glow. I hope she found peace, that wherever she is now, she is no longer lonely or angry. And as for us, the experience left me more aware of the unseen layers in the places we live, and of the delicate, mysterious ways that the past can linger in the present. That was the end of the second story. Now let's begin the third one, the apartment on Linford Street. Apartment with our two young boys, Ethan, who was just 2, and Mason, who was 7 at the time. The place was located on Alder Street, in a quiet little town called Linford. It was in rough shape when we first arrived, peeling paint, creaky floors, and a lot of repairs waiting to be done. But that didn't bother us much. Derek was a contractor, and remodeling rundown properties was his specialty. We were used to making the best out of fixer-uppers. For the first couple of months, things went smoothly. We were making progress, new tiles here, patched up walls there. The kids were adjusting, Derek was in his element, and I kept myself busy with painting and organizing. But as we neared the end of our renovation, something shifted. It was subtle at first, almost laughable. The front door started acting strange. We had to physically throw our weight against it just to get it open. Both of us, Derek and I, slamming our shoulders into the wood while twisting the old knob with all our might. Eventually, after a few minutes of struggle, it would open with a groan. It was frustrating, but we chalked it up to old construction and decided to just use the back door from then on, even if it meant walking around the building every time we came or went. One evening, the 4 of us were lounging in the living room. The kids were playing with their toys, and Derek was flipping through a magazine. The front door, which was locked, suddenly creaked open, slowly, like someone was pushing it from the outside. No one was near it. We all looked at each other, unsure of what we had just witnessed. Later that same night, around 8:30 p.m., Derek left to run a quick errand at the laundromat just a few blocks away. I stayed home with Ethan and Mason, trying to finish up some painting in the hallway. While I was cleaning my brush, I heard the front doorknob rattle. I paused, ready to open it, thinking Derek was back and just had his hands full. But then, I stopped. He always came in without knocking. Before I could make sense of it, I heard a soft voice, clearly a woman's, coming from the doorway. She sounded like she was speaking to a child, gently saying, "Hello." I froze. Panic set in and I sprinted into the boys' bedroom, slammed the door and grabbed the baseball bat we kept under the bed. Mason looked at me wide-eyed and asked, "What's going on, Mom?" I couldn't answer. I pressed my ear to the bedroom door. I couldn't hear voices anymore, but I imagined, so vividly it felt real, the sound of heavy footsteps pacing outside the room. They weren't just footsteps either. They were heavy, deliberate, like a man in thick-soled black boots. And then came the sound of metal, small metallic clicks and clinks. I realized it was the sound of nails being dropped and picked up repeatedly. Something Derek had been using earlier and left in a plastic roller tray. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed both boys and we bolted into the hallway. Thankfully, the back door still worked, and waited there until Derek returned. When he finally arrived, I told him everything. He looked confused but concerned, brushing it off at first. But that wouldn't be the last time. Things didn't get better after that night. In fact, it was as if the house had finally realized we noticed it, and now it wanted our full attention. One afternoon, I was in the hallway when I heard a loud bang from the bathroom. I rushed over only to find the light had turned itself back on. I clearly remembered flipping it off moments earlier. I stepped back, confused, only to glance again and see it shining brightly as if it had never been touched. It was like the place was messing with me, toying with my memory. Strange noises became common. The people who lived below us, an older couple named the Newells, kept coming up to complain about the sounds coming from our apartment. "It sounds like furniture being thrown or bodies hitting the floor," Mr. Newell would say, eyes wide with fear. But we weren't making any noise. On more than one occasion, the kids were quietly coloring, Derek was fixing a cabinet, and I'd be cleaning or reading. There were no loud crashes, at least not from us. Then came the water, thick, black, and foul-smelling. It started to back up through both the kitchen sink and the toilet. It bubbled and gurgled, overflowing onto the floor. Derek checked the pipes. There was nothing wrong with them. He replaced seals and cleared clogs, but the sludge kept coming back like it had a mind of its own. Things escalated further. The kitchen cabinets began behaving oddly. Every time I walked past them, they would pop open, one at a time, in sync with my steps. Step, click, step, click. It was mechanical, deliberate, and deeply unsettling. Bugs started invading. I found slugs oozing across the front steps, even on dry days. Ants were everywhere, then rats. We tried everything: traps, poison, sealing, holes. Nothing worked. It was like something was driving them into the apartment. I heard it, a frantic fluttering near the ceiling. I looked up and there it was, darting through the air in the kitchen. I shrieked and bolted. In my panic, I didn't realize Derek was standing in the hallway. I ran straight into him, accidentally, knocking him off his feet. He went down hard, slamming his ribs against the corner of the wooden end table. He collapsed, curling into a fetal position, not saying a word. I ran into the bedroom, slammed the door shut behind me, and braced myself. Heart racing. The bat kept flying, hitting walls and light fixtures. The kids were terrified, and I could hear Mason crying in the hallway, calling for me. Derek eventually crawled into the room, holding his side. He could barely breathe. We ended up taking him to urgent care, where we found out he had cracked a couple of ribs. And as if things weren't bad enough, we never caught the bat. That night, we packed a few things and checked into a nearby hotel. It was the only way we could sleep without being terrified. We returned a couple of days later, but the fear lingered. Every noise made us jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. Eventually, we couldn't take it anymore. We didn't even bother finding a new apartment right away. We just moved in with our friend Tasha, who lived on the other side of Linford. We were desperate to get out, to breathe fresh air and sleep in peace. But even with the move, that place on Alder Street still haunted our thoughts. Living with Tasha brought some comfort. Her home was warm, filled with plants and sunlight, and the kind of laughter that only comes from safety. But even there, I sometimes found myself flinching at the creak of a floorboard, or pausing too long at an open door. That apartment in Linford had etched itself into our bones. Derek tried to rationalize everything that had happened. Old pipes, he'd say, or drafty frames. But I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe it either. We both knew something was wrong there, something beyond leaky faucets or pests. It was as if the very walls of that apartment had soaked up something dark, something waiting. Mason, our oldest, didn't talk about it much, but he drew pictures, strange ones. One of them showed a woman in a long dress standing in the kitchen, smiling at a little girl who wasn't there. Another showed a black shadow near the hallway, with lines drawn around it like waves or movement. Ethan, who was too young to understand, had started waking up in the middle of the night crying, asking for lights to be turned back on, even when it was bright. I had dreams, recurring ones. I'd be standing in that same kitchen, the front, door slowly creaking open while I stood frozen in place, unable to move. In the dream, I'd always feel a hand on my shoulder, cold and pressing. And every time I'd turn around to see who it was, I'd wake up gasping. Eventually, we drove by the apartment one afternoon while running errands. It looked the same, run down with rust on the balcony and weeds in the cracks of the pavement. But something was different. There were no curtains in the windows, no lights on, no signs of life. Derek called the landlord out of curiosity, pretending to ask about availability. The unit had been vacant since we left. No one had moved in. The landlord said, "We keep showing it, but people don't stick around long enough to sign anything." I wasn't surprised. Looking back, we never learned what really happened in that apartment, who lived there before us, or what may have taken place within those walls. But it changed us. It made me believe that some spaces carry more than memories, that they can trap energy, emotions, pain, even if the world moves on. We found a new place eventually, a small duplex on the outskirts of town, with wide windows and a view of the river. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. The boys slept through the night again. Derek healed, physically and otherwise. I learned to breathe easier. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the wind rattles the windows just right, I remember the sound of the cabinets clicking open one by one. I remember that whisper in my ear, and I wonder, what would have happened if we had stayed just a little longer? That was the end of the third story. Now let's begin the fourth story, the presence beyond the bedroom door. In early June, I moved into a new apartment in the heart of Asheville, a quaint town known for its old architecture and leafy streets. The building was an old one, constructed back in 1975, according to the lease. The charm of its creaky wooden stairs and vintage doors initially felt comforting, like a slice of history to live in. I've always been someone who could sleep easily anywhere, as long as I had a pillow and blanket. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. I fell asleep effortlessly and woke up rested. But about 3 weeks after moving in, things started to change. On a Monday evening, June 29th, my coworkers and I went out for a casual team gathering. I had a couple of margaritas, something I rarely do because alcohol tends to give me terrible hangovers. That night, I was in bed early, around 9:30 p.m., feeling content after a fun outing. But the next morning, I woke up with a nasty bout of vertigo. It was the kind of dizzy spell that makes the room tilt and your balance go off. I chalked it up to the margaritas, even though I usually don't get that kind of reaction. The vertigo lingered through the day but eased by evening. Tuesday was tough. I felt irritable and exhausted, and I went to bed early again, hoping for better rest, but my sleep was anything but peaceful. Around 3:06 a.m., I jolted awake with a piercing, high-pitched shriek ringing in my ears. It wasn't human, too sharp, too unnatural. My entire room seemed to spin, intensifying the dizziness I was already fighting. I opened my eyes briefly, saw the clock, but couldn't stay awake. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, but the disturbance stayed with me. A few nights later, I had a strange sensation, like someone was standing just beside my bed on the left. It wasn't frightening, more surreal. almost like a presence watching over me. I told myself it might be something divine, some protective spirit perhaps. Then came last Friday night. That evening, I had a dream, or maybe it was a half-dream, half-wake experience that still haunts me. I saw a small figure, a dwarf-like creature dressed in a rough sackcloth skirt. The figure felt female but oddly incomplete. I wasn't sure if it had a companion lurking nearby. What terrified me most was the face. It was twisted, with the right side looking distorted, as if made of flowing liquid. That image sent chills down my spine and woke me completely. When I checked the clock, it was 3:46 a.m., and I still felt as if the figure lingered in the room. The next day, desperate for relief, I reached out to a friend who is a Native American. Together, we performed a smudging ritual in my apartment, burning sage to cleanse the space. That Saturday night, though still uneasy, was a little better. I woke several times but managed some rest. On Sunday, I attended a class about healing crystals. I mentioned my restless nights to the instructor, who recommended setting up a crystal grid around my bed to protect and soothe my sleep. That evening, after another smudging session, I was just about to drift off when a sudden thud startled me. The sage wand I had placed on a shelf had fallen to the floor. I couldn't explain why it fell, but told myself it was probably just gravity. Despite the odd incident, I slept well that Sunday night. Monday night was far worse. I kept waking up repeatedly, each time feeling more unsettled than before. At one point around midnight, I opened my eyes and noticed something strange. The room wasn't as it usually was. A thick fog or mist seemed to have settled in, giving everything an eerie, dreamlike quality. I was groggy, struggling to focus, but the atmosphere felt otherworldly, like I had slipped into some kind of alternate dimension. What disturbed me even more was a sensation I couldn't explain. It felt like my body was being pulled in every direction at once, as if invisible magnets were tugging me apart from all sides. The pressure was intense, almost suffocating, like the tight squeeze you feel on a roller coaster at the peak of a drop. This sensation came and went throughout the night. I noticed it again when I woke up around 12:48 a.m., and then once more around 4 a.m. when I checked the clock again. It was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Adding to the discomfort, I found strange marks on my legs the next morning, small reddish bites like those from an insect. I figured maybe it was just bed bugs or mosquitoes, and decided I'd change my sheets and clean the room thoroughly. But still, it added to the feeling that something was wrong. Over the past 2 weeks, I had several terrifying episodes that I hope were just sleep paralysis. Once I felt as though something or someone was physically pressing down on me, squishing me against the mattress. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, only silently prayed for it to end. The helplessness was overwhelming. When I finally woke from that state, I was drenched in sweat and shaken to the core. I keep telling myself these are just bad dreams, or the body's reaction to stress from moving. But the fear gnaws at me, especially because these incidents seem to be escalating rather than fading. Despite everything, I've been careful not to confront whatever might be there. I don't want to invite any interaction. I just want to reclaim my peaceful sleep. So far, this presence hasn't interfered with my day-to-day life, which makes me question if it's real at all, or if my mind is playing tricks on me. Still, every night I lie in bed wondering, is it possible that something unseen is sharing my apartment? Has anyone else ever felt something like this? Waking up in the middle of the night to shrieks, feeling pulled apart, or seeing twisted faces in half-dreams? I don't know where to turn. The strange experiences have started affecting me during the day too. My concentration slips and the exhaustion lingers despite my best efforts. I'm hesitant to tell friends or family because it sounds unbelievable. And I don't want to be seen as imagining things or worse, losing my grip on reality. The apartment itself, while charming in daylight, feels oppressive at night. The old, wooden floors creak louder, and shadows seem to move just beyond my vision. The faint smell of sage still lingers from the smudging, but it doesn't seem to be enough. I've been trying to research similar stories and remedies. Some people speak of energy imbalances, restless spirits, or even curses tied to old buildings. Asheville is known for its history, but I never thought I'd become part of a story like that. The only comfort I have is that I'm not entirely alone. I have my friend who performed the smudging, and my crystal teacher who gave me the grid to set up around my bed. Yet I can't shake the feeling that the apartment is pushing back. That thud when the sage wand fell feels like a warning more than a coincidence. I want to believe I can fix this. Clean, cleanse, protect, and eventually rest peacefully again. But the nights keep stretching longer, and the disturbances grow stronger. Last night was the most unsettling of all. I barely slept, waking up multiple times with that same strange foggy haze still lingering in my room. Each time I opened my eyes, the sensation of being pulled apart by unseen forces returned, like my body was caught between dimensions, stretched thin by invisible hands. At one point, I could swear I heard whispering voices just beyond my ear, soft murmurs I couldn't quite catch. The room felt charged, heavy with an energy I couldn't explain. Even the familiar creaks of the old apartment sounded distorted, like echoes of something else entirely. I tried to stay calm, breathing deeply, telling myself it was stress, or maybe the effects of my restless sleep catching up. But deep down, a knot of dread tightened in my chest. In the morning, I checked the marks on my legs again. They hadn't changed, but the irritation made me even more anxious. I spent the day washing all the bedding twice and airing out the room. I rearranged the furniture slightly, hoping to shift the energy in the space. I also set up the crystal grid around my bed as my instructor suggested, carefully placing each stone with intention. Black tourmaline for protection, amethyst for calm, clear quartz to amplify positive energy. I lit a small candle nearby and whispered a prayer for peace and safety. For the first time in days, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Yet that night, I faced another challenge. As I lay down and was about to fall asleep, the unmistakable feeling of a presence returned. This time, it wasn't distant or vague. It was close, tangible, as if something was sitting on the edge of my bed watching me. My heart pounded and every instinct screamed to run or scream, but I stayed still. Then I heard it. A low, guttural whisper that sent chills through my spine. The words were unintelligible but full of sorrow and pain. I realized this wasn't an evil spirit, but a trapped soul, maybe lost or hurt, caught in the threads of this old apartment. Remembering what my Native American friend told me, I focused on sending calm and light toward that presence, asking it to find peace and move on. I repeated the prayer silently, grounding myself in the present moment. Gradually, the weight lifted. The room's oppressive heaviness faded, and the pressure on my body eased. Though I still sensed something near, it felt less threatening, almost relieved. I'm not sure if this is the end of my strange nights or just the beginning of a long journey toward healing and understanding. I've decided to continue using smudging and the crystals, and I'm considering inviting a spiritual healer or medium to help cleanse the space more deeply. For now, I am learning to live with the unknown, balancing between fear and hope, logic and belief. To anyone else who has experienced something similar, restless nights, strange sensations, or encounters with the unexplained, I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes the hardest part is just to acknowledge these experiences without judgment, to seek help and comfort where you can, and to hold on to the belief that peace is possible, even in the darkest moments. My nights in this old Asheville apartment have changed me. They've challenged my sense of reality and tested my courage, but they've also opened my eyes to the unseen layers of the world around us, layers I never noticed before. That was the end of the fourth story. Now let's begin the final story, the haunted apartment on Wilmington Pike. The year 2013 wasn't kind to me. Just before spring, my longtime boyfriend of 6 years suddenly ended things out of the blue. Around the same time, my grandfather fell seriously ill and passed away a few weeks later. Life felt heavy, and to complicate things, I had just started seeing someone new after that breakup. It wasn't easy to balance all these emotions, but I managed to land a job in a suburb near where my boyfriend lived. Eventually, we decided to move in together. His name was Alex. We had dated in college but drifted apart after graduation. Over the years, though, we stayed close friends. Recently, Alex had made some big changes. He stopped partying so hard and started focusing more on his health and hobbies. We thought maybe we could give us another chance. So we rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment just outside the city, on Monroe Avenue in Columbus. We didn't have much furniture, only a few hand-me-downs from his aunt and some thrift store finds. Still, it felt like home. Alex was a complex guy, sweet and intelligent, but sometimes he didn't think things through. His recklessness during college, like that time he got into a fight at a bar or broke a neighbor's window, had earned him a rough reputation. But after all that, he was trying to turn a new leaf. One of the few things that kept him grounded was his involvement with a local paranormal investigation group. I wasn't as committed, juggling 2 jobs and a hectic schedule, but Alex dedicated his free time to exploring haunted sites around town. The group often took calls from locals wanting them to check out strange happenings in their homes. We had a few ground rules for investigations. Never bring anything back from a site, and absolutely no Ouija boards inside the apartment. It seemed simple enough, but I had a feeling those rules would be tested. One August evening, Alex went on an investigation trip to an abandoned summer camp near the city outskirts. I stayed back to catch up on chores, packing him a small bag and giving him a quick kiss goodbye. I expected him to be gone all night, but just a few hours later, he showed up unexpectedly. When he walked in, he looked tired and was trying to hide something behind the couch. I asked what was going on, but all he said was he needed a shower and disappeared down the hall. Curious, I peeked behind the sofa, and my heart sank. There was a battered Ouija board inside a plastic bag. I didn't want to start a fight, so I kept quiet and went to the bedroom. A few minutes later, Alex came in and I confronted him about the board. He explained that during their investigation, one of the guys had pulled out the board while exploring an old cabin. They sat around it for a while, asking questions. But after getting no responses, one of the team members snapped the board in half and handed it to Alex to throw away. Apparently, Alex forgot to dispose of it and just kept it in the apartment. Until morning, thinking it wasn't a big deal, I asked him to please get rid of it before daybreak. He did, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, and his worn-out appearance didn't add up. 2 weeks later, Alex went away for the weekend with his mother to visit his grandmother. I was battling a nasty stomach bug and a chest cold, so I stayed home, planning to sleep and rest. Shortly after he left, I heard knocking at the patio door. Thinking it was one of the kids from the complex playing a prank or selling fundraiser candy, I checked, but no one was there. This happened a couple more times. I finally decided to wait by the door and catch whoever it was. When I flung the door open, again, no one was outside. Just as I locked the door, a loud bang came from the bedroom. Armed with a baseball bat, I checked every corner, under the bed, closets, windows, nothing. Trying not to freak out or worry Alex, I told myself it was probably maintenance doing repairs late and went to bed frustrated. In late summer, Daniel went on one of his usual explorations with his local paranormal group, heading to an old summer camp on the outskirts of Greenville. I stayed behind to tackle some chores around our small townhouse. Before he left, I packed a small bag for him, kissed his cheek, and told him I'd see him the next morning. But to my surprise, he came home only a few hours later, much earlier than expected. He was clearly worn out, shuffling in with a plastic bag tucked behind his back as if hiding something. When I asked what was wrong, he just muttered that he needed a shower and walked away. Curious, I sneaked a peek into the bag. It was a Ouija board, the one thing I always told him not to bring inside. I sighed, deciding not to press him. A little while later, he came to the bedroom, looking uneasy. I asked why the board was in the house and why it looked broken. Daniel told me that during the investigation at one of the abandoned cabins, one of the guys pulled out the board. They sat around, asking questions for about 20 minutes. But when nothing happened, one of the guys angrily smashed the board and handed it to Daniel to dispose of. He admitted he'd forgotten to throw it away right then and left it in the bag inside the house. I asked him to get rid of it by morning, and luckily he did. About 2 weeks later, Daniel left town for a weekend trip with his mother to visit his grandmother. I had come down with a nasty flu and chest infection, so I stayed home, planning a weekend of rest, soup, and plenty of fluids. But the weekend didn't go as planned. Not long after Daniel left, I heard knocking at our back patio door. Thinking, it might be a neighbor's kid selling candy for school or borrowing the hose. I peeked out, but no one was there. This happened a few times, and finally I flung the door open to catch the pranksters, but no one was around. Then, just as I locked the door, a loud bang echoed from the bedroom. I grabbed a baseball bat and checked everywhere, under the bed, inside closets, windows, but found nothing. Brushing it off as some noisy maintenance workers, I went to bed, grumbling about the inconsiderate timing of repairs. About 2 hours later, something woke me. Daniel and I shared a large old mattress, and this time the bed was rocking as if someone was trying to wake me. Annoyed but curious, I sat up. At the foot of the bed stood a little girl, or at least the faint silhouette of one. When I rubbed my eyes and looked again, she was gone, sprinting out of the room. Terrified, I stayed locked in the bedroom for the rest of the weekend, not wanting to tell Daniel and spook him. When he returned, I told him what I'd seen. That's when he explained why their trip was cut short. After breaking the Ouija board, Daniel said he'd had a strange, terrible feeling deep inside. He tried to ignore it, but when he and another team member explored further into the woods, near an old schoolhouse, he suddenly felt sick and collapsed. While lying on the ground, he heard someone kick him in the ribs. When he opened his eyes, he saw a huge, dark, shadowy figure looming nearby. Something not quite human, just a dense black mass. He felt choked and terrified but couldn't scream. He passed out again and was later woken by his teammates. I asked him how that explained the little girl ghost I saw. He reminded me that some malevolent spirits can manifest in misleading, less threatening forms. When I asked if he thought something might have followed him home, he just said, "I guess so." I was skeptical, but worried about what that might mean. Fast forward a few months. Strange things escalated at our place. Doors left open after closing, lights flickering and waking up to the stove burners on high multiple times. Meanwhile, Daniel was drinking more, and tension between us grew. He started seeing a woman who claimed to be pregnant with his child, a woman with a sketchy reputation, known for multiple pregnancies and no clear father. We had a massive fight one night. During the argument, I was yelling at him from the kitchen while he stood about 15 feet away down the hallway. Suddenly, the oven door slammed open and then shut twice. We froze, staring at it in silence. After a long pause, Daniel closed and locked the oven door. Neither of us spoke much that night, but we eventually apologized and agreed to take a break while figuring out the messy situation. 3 days later, I was cleaning the bathroom, expecting Daniel home after his shift. I hid behind the door to scare him as he walked past, but no one came. I checked the house, nothing. Then suddenly the locked oven door slammed shut with a gust of foul-smelling air rushing past me. Terrified, I ran outside and called Daniel to come home immediately. Once he arrived, I told him I was leaving, and I packed faster than I ever had. We never went back to that townhouse. Daniel moved out a few weeks after me, and we left a lot of stuff behind. Since then, only vivid nightmares and our godsons. Strange questions about the pretty girl at the house have reminded us of that place. We never told him about the townhouse, so we don't know how he knows the girl. Months after leaving the townhouse, Daniel and I tried to move on, but the shadows of that summer still clung to us. We rented a small cabin by Lake Silverwood, hoping the fresh air and isolation would help. The first few weeks were peaceful. No strange noises, no flickering lights. I thought maybe whatever haunted us had finally moved on. One crisp autumn evening, Daniel invited some friends over for a bonfire. We gathered around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. As the night deepened, one of the friends, Marla, brought up the history of the old schoolhouse near the woods, the same one Daniel had mentioned months earlier. She said, "They say that place was shut down after a fire killed several children, decades ago. Some say the fire was arson and the bodies were never properly recovered. Daniel's face darkened. That's the place where I felt sick and saw that shadow. Marla shivered and added, people say the spirits of those kids sometimes show up, but they're not all innocent. Some have been twisted by pain and anger. As we talked, the wind picked up and whispered through the trees. Suddenly, a flicker of light darted between the branches, like a child running. We all froze. The next morning, I found a small, old-fashioned music box on our porch, the kind that plays a haunting lullaby. None of us had seen it before. Daniel said, I don't want to know where that came from. Days later, the nightmares returned. I dreamt of a little girl with pale skin and hollow eyes singing that lullaby. She reached out her hand, whispering, come play with me. Each morning I woke drenched in sweat, feeling an icy chill in the room. Daniel started having nightmares too, but his were darker, a faceless shadow chasing him through charred ruins, always ending in a scream. One afternoon while cleaning the cabin, I found strange scratches on the wall near the fireplace. They looked like small handprints clawed deep into the plaster. Daniel insisted we get someone to bless the place, but I worried that might just anger whatever was here. A few nights later, while Daniel was at work, I heard whispering voices around the cabin. They spoke in soft, childlike tones, but the words were jumbled and impossible to understand. The temperature dropped suddenly, and my breath fogged in the cold air. I grabbed my phone to call Daniel, but the line was dead. Then a faint giggle echoed through the room. Panicked, I ran outside and locked every door and window. I stayed up all night, clutching a flashlight and waiting for dawn. When Daniel returned the next morning, I told him everything. He looked exhausted but resolved. I've been researching, he said. The fire wasn't just a tragedy. Some say the school was a site for terrible experiments. Children held there against their will, trapped between worlds. He pulled out an old yellowed newspaper clipping he'd found online. The headline read, Greenville School Fire, Tragedy or Cover-Up. The article described how the school's owner was rumored to have dabbled in occult practices, and many believed the fire was set to cover up the horrors within. Daniel and I looked at each other, realizing that whatever was haunting us wasn't just a restless spirit. It was something far more malevolent, bound by rage and sorrow. Determined to end it, we contacted a local historian who specialized in haunted sites. She agreed to meet us and help uncover the truth. As she walked through the cabin, her expression grew serious. This place is a crossroads, she said. It's connected to the old schoolhouse, and the spirits here are tethered to it. To find peace, you must confront the source, but be warned, it won't be easy. That night, armed with salt, candles, and a camera, we ventured into the woods toward the ruins of the schoolhouse. The air grew colder with every step, and the trees seemed to close in around us. As we reached the burnt remains, a thick mist rose from the ground. Suddenly, the silhouette of the little girl appeared again, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She spoke softly, "Help us. Free us." Daniel stepped forward, heart pounding. "We want to help. Tell us how." The girl's form flickered and a voice echoed through the ruins, a mixture of many voices, children's and adults alike, begging for release from their torment. The historian began a ritual of cleansing, chanting ancient words while sprinkling salt and burning sage. The ground trembled beneath our feet. Shadows twisted and writhed in the mist. Then slowly, the oppressive darkness began to lift. By dawn, the ruins were silent and still. We returned to the cabin, exhausted but hopeful. In the weeks that followed, the strange occurrences stopped. The nightmares ceased. Daniel and I finally felt a sense of peace returning to our lives. Yet sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I swear I hear a faint lullaby drifting through the trees, a reminder of the souls we freed and those still watching from beyond. That's all the stories for today, folks. What did you think? Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for listening and have a good night.